At 11:42 on the morning of January 27, 1945, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen crouched behind the central fire control station of the B-29 Superfortress Aquar 52. He watched oxygen frost spread across the plexiglass as the formation climbed through 28,000 feet over the Pacific. He was 22 years old with 11 combat missions over Japan and 0 confirmed kills. The Japanese had launched at least 40 fighters to intercept the morning strike on Tokyo. Chen was the youngest gunner in the 497th Bombardment Group. His hand stayed steady on the controls that linked him to 4 remote gun turrets placed along the B-29 fuselage. Each turret carried twin 50 caliber machine guns. He had fired them twice over Nagoya and once near the Japanese coast. He had never seen an enemy fighter go down. The 73rd Bombardment Wing had been flying from Saipan since November. The routine stayed unchanged. High-altitude precision bombing between 28,000 and 30,000 feet with temperatures dropping to 50 below zero. Jet stream winds were so strong that bombardiers struggled to adjust. Japanese fighters climbed to intercept on every mission. By mid-January the wing had lost 31 B-29s to fighters and anti-aircraft fire. That meant 31 crews and 340 men. The heaviest losses happened on January 14 over Nagoya when 5 superfortresses were destroyed in less than 20 minutes. Earlier in the war, German Panther and Tiger tanks had shown American tank crews the limits of weaker armor. Now Japanese interceptors were showing B-29 crews the limits of altitude advantage. The Nakajima Ki-44 could reach 28,000 feet in under 8 minutes. American intelligence called it Tojo while Japanese pilots called it Shoki, which meant devil queller. The name matched its role. The Ki-44 carried 4 12.7 mm machine guns or 2 20 mm cannons. At high altitude the thin air affected B-29 gunners who dealt with frozen weapons and low oxygen levels. A single fighter could attack several times with little resistance. Even more dangerous were ramming attacks. Beginning in August 1944, Japanese pilots started crashing into B-29s after using their ammunition. This was not formal kamikaze doctrine but a calculated choice. Trading one fighter for one bomber was seen as acceptable since a bomber cost $600,000 and carried 11 trained crew members. The 47th Sentai based at Naramesu Airfield near Tokyo operated a unit trained for these missions. American intelligence believed they had destroyed at least 3 B-29s through ramming and damaged 7 more beyond repair after forced landings. Aquar 52 carried 6 tons of high-explosive bombs aimed at Tokyo port facilities. Weather aircraft had reported clear skies over the target. This meant visual bombing which required the formation to stay steady during the bomb run. That also gave enemy fighters time to position for accurate attacks. Chen had received the briefing at 0400 that morning. A total of 62 B-29s would take part in the strike. Intelligence expected that 9 would not return. The formation crossed the Japanese coast at 11:58. Radar operators on Honshu detected them immediately. Air raid sirens sounded across Tokyo. At Naramesu Airfield, pilots rushed toward fighters already warming on the runway. At exactly noon the first Ki-44 aircraft took off and turned southeast toward the incoming bombers. There were 43 fighters. Aquar 52 was about to face more enemy aircraft than any B-29 had encountered in a single mission. The first fighter appeared at 12,000 yards. Chen saw it through the optical sight as a dark speck climbing almost straight through scattered clouds. The shape grew larger and its wings became clear. Then he recognized the radial engine cowling of a Ki-44. The fighter rolled upside down at 27,000 feet and dived toward the lead element of the formation. 3 more aircraft followed behind it. Chen turned his upper forward turret to track the diving attack. The remote system allowed him to control guns placed 15 feet away from his position. A computer adjusted for airspeed, altitude and the forward motion of the B-29. The system was advanced but unstable in temperatures of 50 below zero. The lead Ki-44 opened fire at 800 yards. Tracers moved toward the formation. Chen pressed the firing control and the turret responded immediately. 50 caliber rounds moved toward the fighter at 2,800 feet per second. The Ki-44 rolled sharply to the left and dropped below the formation. There were no hits. The fighter had disengaged too quickly. By 12:07 the formation was fully engaged. Fighters attacked from every direction. The usual tactic involved a high side approach from the 11 o'clock position followed by a dive through the formation at high speed and a sharp turn to escape the defensive fire of the B-29. Most fighters did not continue attacks at close range. Ramming attacks followed a different pattern. Chen heard the aircraft commander report a fighter at 2 o'clock high. He moved the upper turret in that direction. A Ki-44 was lining up for a side attack. The range closed to 700 yards. The fighter aimed directly at Aquar 52. Chen calculated the lead and fired a 3-second burst. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds crossed the fighter path. The Ki-44 engine failed and black smoke appeared from the front. The aircraft rolled upside down and fell away while burning. This was his first confirmed kill. He remained focused. 2 more fighters moved into position. The right side gunner fired at one target using twin 50 caliber guns. The tail gunner reported another fighter approaching from the rear at low altitude. The central fire control system allowed Chen to guide the lower turret using his sight. He tracked the target and fired but did not hit it. The tail gunner then engaged and struck the wing area. The fighter shook and parts of its outer surface broke away. It entered a flat spin. This became the second kill credited to Aquar 52. The formation reached the starting point for the bomb run at 12:19. This phase carried the highest risk. The bombers had to fly straight and level for 6 minutes while bombardiers aligned their Norden bomb sights. No course changes were allowed and evasive action was not possible. The fighters were aware of this phase. 14 Ki-44 aircraft gathered about 3,000 feet above the bomber stream. They circled once then again while setting up a coordinated attack meant to break through the B-29 defensive fire. At 12:21 they began their dive. Chen counted them through his sight. 1, 2, 3, 4 fighters descending in pairs from the 10 o'clock high and 2 o'clock high positions at the same time. This was a standard approach. The formation gunners had to divide their fire. Each B-29 would now face several attackers with reduced protection. The first pair opened fire at 1,000 yards. Chen engaged the lead aircraft. His tracers joined fire from 2 other B-29s nearby. The Ki-44 flew straight into the combined stream. Its canopy broke apart. The fighter rolled sharply and struck its wingman. Both aircraft broke up in the air. This resulted in the third and fourth kills. The second attacking pair used the confusion to move closer. 2 Ki-44s were now within 500 yards and closing fast. Their cannons were active. Chen could see the flashes clearly. He moved his sight to follow the nearest aircraft. The Ki-44 did not turn away and showed no attempt to evade. The pilot had chosen a direct ramming approach. Impact was seconds away. Chen continued firing. The upper forward turret sent rounds into the engine section of the fighter. Impacts appeared across the nose. The distance closed to 300 yards then 200. The fighter was producing smoke but continued forward. At 100 yards it struck Aquar 52 No. 3 engine at 12:22. The collision produced a heavy metallic impact. The fighter propeller tore into the engine housing. The B-29 shifted hard to the right as the No. 3 propeller broke free and spun away. The fighter wing separated and the fuselage rolled over the bomber before falling away. Fragments of metal passed the gun positions. Chen felt the aircraft shake throughout. Warning signals appeared across the flight engineer panel. The No. 3 engine was on fire and the No. 4 engine was losing oil pressure. The aircraft commander shut down both engines on the right side and activated the fire system. Aquar 52 was now operating on 2 engines. The bomber dropped out of formation and began to lose altitude at 300 feet per minute. It was now alone, damaged and exposed as a clear target. 3 Ki-44 aircraft left their formation and moved toward the damaged bomber. They had both altitude and speed advantage. Standard procedure required damaged bombers to be destroyed quickly before they could release their bombs and regain control. Chen turned the upper turret toward the first attacker. The fighter was diving from the 1 o'clock high position at 1,000 yards and closing. Chen waited because the targeting system needed about 3 seconds to calculate a firing solution on a moving target. He held his fire. At 800 yards the fighter opened cannon fire. Rounds struck the left wing of Aquar 52 and hydraulic fluid began to leak from damaged lines. At 600 yards Chen fired a 4-second burst. The tracers hit the target. The canopy of the Ki-44 broke apart and the fighter rolled left and fell while shedding debris. This became the 5th kill. The second fighter approached from the 5 o'clock level position. The tail gunner engaged first. His twin 50 caliber guns fired for 6 seconds. The Ki-44 passed through the tracer stream without visible damage and closed to 400 yards. The tail gunner stopped firing as his ammunition was finished. Chen then took control of the lower aft turret. The mechanical response was slow. Hydraulic pressure continued to fall across all systems. Chen tracked the fighter by hand. He led the target and fired a 2-second burst. The round struck the left wing root of the Ki-44. The wing bent upward and failed structurally. The fighter tumbled and broke apart at 12,000 feet. This became the 6th kill. At the same time the third attacker used the moment as a distraction. A Ki-44 was now at the 3 o'clock high position at 300 yards with wings level and nose aimed directly at Aquar 52 cockpit. The fighter guns were silent because the pilot had used all ammunition. This was a second ramming attempt. The right blister gunner opened fire and round struck the engine area. The fighter stayed on course. Chen moved the upper turret sharply to the right until it reached its limit. He fired and the tracers passed above the target. He adjusted and fired again. This time rounds hit across the fuselage. The Ki-44 shook but continued forward. The range closed to 100 yards then 50. The fighter struck Aquar 52 No. 1 engine. The propeller broke apart and fragments tore into the wing. The No. 1 fuel tank ruptured and fuel streamed into the air. The fuselage of the Ki-44 split into 2 parts. The rear section moved over the bomber while the front section hit the left wing and created a 6-foot opening along the leading edge. Aquar 52 now had only one working engine, which was No. 2. The aircraft was descending through 18,000 feet. Air speed dropped below 160 miles per hour. Fuel was leaking from the wing and the hydraulic system was failing. 12 more Japanese fighters were preparing for another attack. Chen's hands were numb. The temperature inside the unpressurized gun station had dropped to 62 below zero. His oxygen mask had frozen to his face. Ice covered the optical sight, so he cleared it with his glove and continued tracking incoming fighters. The 12 Ki-44 aircraft split into 3 groups of 4. This followed a standard pattern where one group would approach from above, another from below, and the third would take advantage of any weakness. This method worked well even against undamaged B-29 aircraft with full crews and working systems. Against a damaged bomber with failing hydraulics and limited gun coverage it became highly effective. Aquar 52 dropped through 16,000 feet. The single engine could not hold altitude because of heavy drag from the damaged wing. The aircraft commander ordered all non-essential weight to be removed. Ammunition boxes, tool kits and survival gear were thrown out. Every reduction in weight was important. The first group of 4 fighters attacked from the 12 o'clock high position. Chen engaged the lead fighter at 900 yards. The upper turret responded slowly due to reduced hydraulic pressure which had fallen to 30%. He fired despite the limitation. The recoil shook the mount and tracers moved toward the diving fighter. The Ki-44 turned right but Chen followed and fired again. The second burst hit the left wing. The outer covering tore away and internal structure became visible. The wing failed and the fighter rolled and went down. This became the seventh kill. The remaining three fighters continued their attack and opened fire together at 600 yards. Cannon rounds and machine gun fire struck Aquar-52 from several directions. The bombardier section was hit multiple times and the front glass shattered. Cold air rushed into the fuselage. The bombardier was killed by a 20 mm explosive round. Chen stayed focused and moved the turret toward the second fighter. The targeting system was no longer working because hydraulic failure had disabled automatic correction. He aimed manually using experience from previous missions. He fired and the burst struck low. Rounds hit the underside of the fighter. The Ki-44 turned sharply and climbed away while releasing smoke which suggested damage. Chen then shifted to the third fighter which was closer at 400 yards and diving steeply. He fired a 6-second burst. The gun barrels were overheating even in the extreme cold. Tracers filled the air and the Ki-44 passed through them. Hits struck the engine area and the propeller stopped and began to spin freely in the airflow. The fighter nose dropped and it passed below Aquar-52 left wing at about 200 miles per hour before disappearing into the clouds. This was the 8th confirmed kill. The 4th fighter in the group used the confusion to move into position for a side attack. It approached from the 9 o'clock level position at 500 yards. The left blister gunner engaged using twin 50 caliber guns. The fighter shifted slightly and closed to 300 yards then fired a long burst from its cannons. The round struck Aquar-52 left horizontal stabilizer. Control cables broke and the aircraft turned sharply. The rudder jammed toward the left. The aircraft commander struggled to regain control by applying right aileron and reducing power on the single working engine to stabilize the aircraft. Chen followed the attacking fighter as it moved below the fuselage and attempted to control the lower turret. The linkage moved unevenly and then stopped after limited rotation due to hydraulic failure. The tail gunner responded instead. His guns were still operational because they used a mechanical system. He fired a 4-second burst as the Ki-44 climbed after its attack. The rounds hit the tail section and the rudder detached. The fighter entered an uncontrolled flat spin. This became the 9th kill credited to the crew of Aquar-52. Another group of 4 fighters was already approaching. They came from the 2 o'clock high position. Aquar-52 was now at 14,000 feet and still descending. Air speed had dropped to 140 miles per hour, which was close to stall conditions. One engine could not provide enough power to maintain stable flight with the damaged wing and jammed rudder. Chen had only 15 rounds left in the upper turret. The lower turrets were no longer working. The blister gunners had very little ammunition remaining. The tail gunner had around 60 rounds left. 4 more fighters were closing quickly. The incoming Ki-44 aircraft divided into 2 pairs. Experience had shown that even damaged B-29 bombers could still deliver strong defensive fire. Attacking from multiple directions remained the safest method. The first pair dived from the 2 o'clock high position while the second pair prepared for a follow-up attack from the 4 o'clock level position. Chen tracked the lead fighter of the first pair at 800 yards. The upper turret moved but the response was uneven due to loss of hydraulic fluid from damaged lines across the aircraft. He waited until 700 yards then centered his aim and fired all remaining 15 rounds in one burst. The tracers reached the Ki-44 engine area. Impacts appeared across the front section. The propeller broke apart and pieces separated. The engine stopped and smoke followed as the fighter rolled and fell away. This marked the 10th kill. The upper turret was now empty and no longer useful. Chen moved through the connecting passage toward the rear section, which was not pressurized. The right blister gunner had been hit by fragments in the shoulder and could not continue operating his weapons. Chen took his place. The second fighter from the first pair was already diving toward the bomber at 600 yards. Chen gripped the manual controls for the twin 50 caliber guns. There was no computer support and no hydraulic assistance, so all movement depended on physical effort. The Ki-44 opened fire at 400 yards and cannon round struck Aquar 52 right wing. Chen led the target and pressed the trigger. The recoil struck his shoulders as spent casings dropped into the collection bag. The burst hit the fighter cockpit and the canopy broke apart. The Ki-44 rolled sharply to the left and fell while spinning. This became the 11th kill. At the same time, the second pair of fighters had already begun their attack. They approached from the 4 o'clock level position with a distance of 300 yards between them while firing as they closed. One aimed at the flight deck while the other targeted the wing route where the fuel tanks were located. The tail gunner engaged the trailing fighter. His remaining ammunition was used in a 5-second burst. Tracers moved across the nose of the Ki-44 and the front glass broke apart. The fighter pulled upward and left the attack path. This became the 12th kill when it was later seen falling through clouds at 11,000 feet with no pilot visible. The lead fighter continued its approach. Chen tried to engage, but the angle was not suitable. The blister gun position could not rotate far enough forward to target a fighter at the 4 o'clock high position. He could not engage the threat. The left blister gunner responded instead because his position allowed better forward coverage. He fired his final 30 rounds. The burst hit the left wing root of the Ki-44 and fuel leaked from damaged tanks. The fighter turned sharply to disengage, but the damaged wing could not withstand the stress. The wing structure failed and separated. The aircraft tumbled and broke apart. This became the 13th kill. Aquar 52 had now destroyed 13 Japanese fighters with a single crew. However, the count was not important to Chen. The B-29 had descended to 12,000 feet and continued to lose altitude. The jammed rudder made stable control extremely difficult. The damaged wing continued to weaken and a third group of 4 fighters was approaching. These were the final attackers. Japanese pilots operated with strict fuel limits. The Ki-44 had a combat range of about 200 miles at combat power. The fighters had already been in the air for 40 minutes and likely had about 10 minutes of fuel left before returning to Naramesu. That time was still enough to complete another attack. The 4 Ki-44 aircraft formed a line behind the bomber. This was not a dive or a standard pass. They were preparing for sequential ramming attacks. 4 fighters meant 4 planned collisions. The pilots calculated that even one successful impact would be enough to destroy Aquar 52. Chen observed them through the small window of the blister position. The fighters were at 14,000 feet and about 2 miles behind the bomber while matching its speed and altitude. They were preparing for a final approach. Chen had no ammunition left. The tail gunner had no ammunition left. The upper turrets were no longer working. The lower turrets were also inactive. Aquar 52 defensive capability was exhausted. For incoming fighters and no remaining firepower at 12,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. The lead Ki-44 in the ramming formation increased speed. The range closed to 1 mile as the fighter descended slightly to gain momentum. Standard ramming doctrine required an impact speed of at least 300 miles per hour to ensure structural failure of the target. Slower impacts sometimes allowed bombers to remain airborne with damage. Chen held himself against the blister window frame. He had no remaining options. There were no guns and no ammunition available. The aircraft commander attempted evasive movement, but the jammed rudder limited control. The B-29 could only make small banking turns and could not perform sharp movements to disrupt the attacker aim. The Ki-44 closed to half a mile. Chen could now see clear details including the dark green paint and the red insignia on the fuselage and the yellow spinner that identified it as part of the 47th Sentai. At a quarter-mile the fighter nose aligned with a WWII vertical stabilizer. Impact was expected within seconds. At this moment the Ki 44 engine began releasing black smoke. This was not damage from defensive fire. It was a mechanical issue. The Nakajima Ha-109 radial engine was known to struggle under extended high-power conditions. Continuous maximum output often pushed temperatures beyond safe limits and caused failure. The propeller stopped turning, which confirmed engine failure. Without thrust the fighter could not hold its path. It began to lose speed and altitude. The pilot attempted to restart the engine but was not successful. The aircraft dropped below a WWII tail and the ramming attempt ended due to mechanical failure rather than defensive action. This was recorded as the 14th kill for a WWII. No weapons were used and no gunner claimed the result. The loss was attributed to the strain of combat conditions on an already stressed engine. Later reports confirmed the Ki 44 crashed into the Pacific about 18 miles east of Tokyo and the pilot did not survive. 14 confirmed kills were recorded for one bomber in a single mission, which became the highest total achieved by any bomber in the Pacific theater. The remaining 3 fighters ended their attack attempts. Their fuel levels were critical, so they turned toward Naramesu and climbed away. The engagement had ended. A WWII remained airborne, but its condition at 12,000 feet over hostile territory with only one functioning engine created a new challenge. Chen moved back through the connecting passage to review the situation with the flight engineer. The damage assessment was severe. The number 1 engine was destroyed by a ramming attack. The number 3 engine was also destroyed in a similar impact. The number 4 engine had been shut down due to oil pressure loss. The number 2 engine was still operating but showed signs of high temperature. The left wing had structural damage and the right wing was losing fuel. The hydraulic system was operating at only 15% capacity. The rudder was jammed. The bombardier had been killed. The right blister gunner was seriously injured. The radio compass was damaged and one life raft had been destroyed by cannon fire. The distance to Saipan was 1,512 miles. At the current speed the flight would require about 11 hours. The available fuel could support only 9 hours if the remaining engine continued to operate without failure. The situation was not sustainable. The flight engineer suggested restarting the number 4 engine. It had been shut down earlier as a precaution due to low oil pressure but was not completely destroyed. Operating it without proper lubrication would likely cause failure within 30 minutes, but that limited time could provide enough thrust to improve air speed and reduce overall fuel use. The aircraft commander agreed to the attempt. The number 4 engine restarted with difficulty and began running unevenly but still produced thrust. A WWII increased speed to 170 miles per hour, which remained below normal cruise speed but was enough to reduce the rate of descent. The bomber leveled at 10,000 feet. The formation continued toward Tokyo without them and the mission had been completed with bombs released. Other B-29 aircraft were already turning south for the return to Saipan. A WWII was now alone over the Pacific with 2 damaged engines, failing systems and limited fuel. Chen moved the injured blister gunner into a more stable position and applied pressure bandages to the wounds. The morphine in the first aid kit had frozen and could not be used. Pain relief was not possible. The gunner stayed conscious but continued to lose blood. The distance to Saipan required about 11 hours of flight if they could sustain it. At 1,420 hours the number 4 engine failed exactly 28 minutes after restart. The cylinder heads overheated beyond safe limits and internal parts seized. The propeller rotated freely for a few seconds before stopping. The aircraft commander feathered the propeller to reduce drag and shut off fuel supply. A WWII was again operating on one engine. Altitude began to decrease immediately from 10,000 feet to 9,500, then 9,000. The single Curtiss Wright radial engine in the number 2 position now carried the full load of the damaged bomber. The navigator recalculated fuel and estimated 7 hours of remaining flight time while the distance to Saipan remained about 900 miles. The figures were still unfavorable. The flight engineer suggested removing the bomb bay fuel tanks. These tanks had been added to extend range for missions over Japan but were now empty and only added weight. The structure weighed about 400 pounds and served no purpose. The tanks were released at 14:45. The aircraft gained a small amount of altitude and recovered about 100 feet. Fuel efficiency improved slightly by about 6 minutes, which was still not enough to solve the problem. Chen stayed at the right blister position with the wounded gunner. The bleeding had slowed but the gunner showed signs of shock. Body temperature dropped in the unpressurized aircraft. Chen removed his heated flight liner and wrapped it around the injured man. The heating element still worked using battery power independent of the aircraft systems. At 1,500 hours the navigator proposed an alternative route toward Iwo Jima, which was about 640 miles away. The island had not yet been taken and remained under Japanese control, but American submarines sometimes operated nearby to rescue downed crews. If Aquar 52 could reach the area and land on water successfully, there was a chance of recovery. The aircraft commander rejected the plan. Landing a B-29 on open water had a survival rate of about 40%. With damage to both wings and a jammed rudder, the chances were even lower. The aircraft could break apart on impact, and even if the crew survived, they would be exposed in a combat zone with limited equipment. The decision was made to continue toward Saipan. At 1,600 hours Aquar 52 crossed the international date line. The navigator recorded their position at about 700 miles from Saipan with fuel for about 5 hours and 40 minutes. The difference between range and fuel was decreasing but still not sufficient. The flight engineer began shutting down systems that were not essential. Lights, instruments, heating and internal systems were turned off to reduce load on the engine. Lower load meant less resistance and improved fuel use. The temperature inside the aircraft dropped to -40 degrees. At 1,730 hours another formation of B-29 aircraft returning from Tokyo passed overhead at 18,000 feet in full formation with all engines operating normally. They were flying at about 270 miles per hour and would reach Saipan in about 4 hours. Aquar 52 was flying at 160 miles per hour at 8,000 feet with an estimated time of 7 hours to reach the same destination. Fuel exhaustion was expected in about 4 hours and 50 minutes. At 1,800 hours the right blister gunner lost consciousness. Breathing became shallow and pulse weak. Chen continued to monitor him but had no additional medical supplies beyond the frozen morphine and bandages already used. At 1845 the number 2 engine began to run unevenly. Cylinder head temperature entered the danger range and oil pressure became unstable. The engine had been running at maximum power for nearly 7 hours. Under normal conditions this type of engine was rated for about 4 hours at continuous maximum power. These conditions were far beyond normal limits. The flight engineer reduced power slightly to preserve the engine. Air speed dropped to 150 miles per hour. Fuel efficiency improved but travel time increased. At 1900 hours the navigator calculated that the aircraft was about 400 miles from Saipan. Remaining fuel was estimated at 3 hours and 20 minutes. The figures still did not balance, but the difference was becoming smaller. At 2000 hours the right blister gunner stopped breathing. Chen attempted to revive him. The freezing air made chest compressions extremely difficult through the heavy flight suit. After 4 minutes the flight engineer confirmed the time of death. The body was left in place since moving it would serve no purpose and would waste energy needed for survival. The number 2 engine kept running. Cylinder head temperature stayed in the red zone but the engine did not fail. Oil pressure moved between 40 and 60 pounds per square inch. The minimum acceptable level was 50. The engine was operating at the edge of complete failure. At 2100 hours the navigator saw navigation lights. A Navy destroyer was visible 20 miles to the east on patrol south of Ioma. The destroyer could not assist them. It could not come near the aircraft or provide fuel. However, its position confirmed the navigator calculations were correct. At 2145 fuel gauges showed 30 minutes remaining. The distance to Saipan was 120 miles. At the current speed the flight time was 48 minutes. The gap was still too large. The flight engineer transferred all remaining fuel from the wing tanks to the tank serving the number 2 engine. Fuel pumps and cross-feed valves were used. Every drop of aviation fuel was directed to the one working engine. At 2200 hours the aircraft was 60 miles from Saipan. Fuel gauges showed 15 minutes remaining. The navigator could see the runway lights at Ely Field on the southern end of the island. Distance was 8 miles. The bomber was at 4,000 feet and descending. The number 2 engine began to struggle. Fuel starvation caused it to fail briefly then restart. It ran smoothly for 20 seconds then failed again. The propeller slowed and then restarted. Power kept changing. 3 miles from the runway the altitude was 2,000 feet. The tower at Ely Field cleared Aquare 52 for emergency landing. Crash teams were ready and ambulances were placed along the runway. The landing gear would not extend due to hydraulic failure. The flight engineer used the manual crank system. The nose gear extended. The left main gear extended. The right main gear stayed retracted due to damage from earlier attacks. 1 mile from the runway and at 1,000 feet the number 2 engine stopped completely. Fuel was exhausted. The propeller stopped turning. Aquare 52 became a glider with 32 tons of damaged structure and uneven landing gear. The aircraft commander aimed for the runway. Airspeed was 130 miles per hour and the descent rate was 800 feet per minute. The aircraft was still too fast and too steep. It crossed the runway threshold at 300 feet. It was still too high. The bomber touched down halfway along the runway at 110 miles per hour. The left main gear failed immediately. The aircraft turned left and the left wing struck the runway surface. Metal scraped and sparks flew. Aquare 52 slid 1,500 feet and stopped in the dirt beside the runway. All surviving crew members exited through the rear escape hatch. 10 men survived. The bombardier and the right blister gunner did not survive. The aircraft was declared a total loss since the structural damage could not be repaired. Aquare 52 flew 1,512 miles on a single engine. It shot down 14 Japanese fighters in one mission. It survived 2 ramming attacks and brought 10 men home. If this story had an impact on you, consider supporting it. Like the video so more people can see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We share stories like this every day about crews and gunners who fought with determination and 50 caliber weapons. These are real people and real acts of courage. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Whether you are in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia, your support matters. You are part of keeping these stories alive. Share your location and if someone in your family served. Thank you for watching and for helping preserve the memory of Chen and the crew of Aquare 52. These men deserve to be remembered and your support helps ensure they are not forgotten.